Hello YouTube family, thanks for joining me on my videos. If you like the videos, please give me a like. If you've not subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel to help the channel grow. Thanks for watching the video. Hello again YouTube family, thanks for joining me on this episode. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the issue of members of Congress trading individual stocks. It comes up periodically in the news. The news media in general doesn't cover it that well. The news media basically carries water for the politicians. You've got outlets like Fox News and Newsmax who cover for Republicans. You've got people on CNN, MSNBC who cover for Democrats and try to muddy the water on the issue. They don't honestly talk about the issue. You have some reporters who have directly questioned lawmakers, including Democrat leadership like Nancy Pelosi about it. Nancy Pelosi just last year was asked a question about it, about members of Congress trading stocks, and she made this ridiculous comment that, well, we're a free market economy, and I believe people should be allowed to trade stocks. And of course she does. She and her husband, Paul Pelosi, are extremely wealthy from trading stocks, as are a number of other members of Congress. One thing to keep in mind is that there are plenty of members of Congress who are wealthy, come from wealthy families. There are other members, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, who don't come from wealth, who don't come from money, who don't have capital behind them. They're just average people who ran for office, got elected, and they're trying to actually do things that would help average people. But I don't know if you remember, in 2020, prior to COVID being a well-known, talked about issue, there was a meeting held between lawmakers in Congress, senators, and members of the national security group and military and members of the medical community who were tracking COVID as it was making its way around the globe. And people in that meeting in the Senate were informed that COVID is going to be bad. It's going to be a pandemic, most likely. It's going to spread around the world. No country will probably go untouched. It's going to end up trashing the economy. It's going to end up killing a lot of people, making a lot of people sick. And they were made very aware of the ramifications of COVID. This was at a time when the Trump administration was still trying to downplay what COVID was. But people in the Senate were made very keenly aware of exactly how bad it was going to be. Some of those people still then tried to downplay it. But one thing they didn't do was go out and tell us how bad it was going to be. They didn't start sounding the alarm when they got this meeting. What they did do, however, was start selling stocks. Knowing that the stock market was going to take a plunge, they were selling to make their profits while the stocks were still up. And during that time period, only 4 senators were investigated for illegal stock trades. The only one who's still under investigation is Richard Burr, a Republican. You had numerous members of the Senate, more than just this 4 who were investigated, who started selling off stocks. They started selling some stocks, buying others. And you look at the actual trades they were doing, and they were selling stocks of companies that most likely were going to take a nosedive during COVID when the stock market tanked. They were buying stocks in companies that make health equipment that were going to be needed during the pandemic. And so, I mean, to any reasonable person, you can say that they were trading on insider information. They were trading on information they had that the general public did not have. And honestly, unless they told people in the business community, they were trading on information people in the business community didn't have. They were trading on information that people on Wall Street didn't have. And that's why you have people in Congress doing so phenomenally well in the stock market, because they have access to information that the rest of us don't have. They have information on what regulations are coming down the road that will perhaps hurt one sector of companies, help another sector of companies. They have inside information on legislation that's going to get passed, that's going to dole out millions or billions of dollars of federal funding to companies whose stock will then rise as they start getting massive investments from the federal government. Basically, charity handouts from the federal government. In 2021, last year, over 100 members of Congress traded around $290 million in stocks and beat the market. The members of Congress continually beat the stock market. And you can look at that and say, well, I assume the people we happen to elect into Congress are just the smartest investors on the planet, because they also beat Wall Street. These financial wizards on Wall Street that have their fancy Ivy League educations in finance, members of Congress are outperforming them by a lot. Or you could be reasonable and say, obviously people in Congress are using the inside information they have to trade stocks, and that's why they so consistently beat the market. You've had people propose legislation to try and stop it. You have people in the country who are unhappy with it. Here is a poll showing as much. And it shows that most Democratic and GOP voters say lawmakers shouldn't be allowed to trade stocks. You look at all voters, 46% of all voters say that lawmakers should not be allowed to trade stocks individually. Among Democrats, it's 48%. Among independents, 46%. Republicans, 44%. And the strongly oppose, 12% among Republicans strongly oppose preventing lawmakers from trading stocks. So, I mean, you have the most support. It shouldn't be surprising among Republican voters, because they have been conditioned, they've been groomed to believe ridiculous things, including that our lawmakers should be allowed to take the information they have and trade stocks on it so they can become wealthy. So it doesn't surprise me that the biggest approval comes from the Republican Party, but it's still very much lower than those who oppose. Republican voters, registered Republicans, to the tune of 44% say that lawmakers should not be trading stocks individually. And it's not above 50% on any category, but it's the vast majority of the people polled. Along with that, you have the actual data on how well these lawmakers do. Average annual stock performance in relation to the market. Average households, you and me, between 1991 and 96, minus 1.5%, we lost. Average people who try and play in the stock market generally lose. Corporate insiders do quite well, 7.4%. Not as well as senators, though, who are doing 12.3%. Then you have the House of Representatives that do 6%. So in the House, between 85 and 2001, they did not do quite as well as the corporate insiders, but they did rather well. They weren't that far behind, 1.4% behind. And if you look at that now, this is older data, but it hasn't changed that much, except that you have people in the House who are doing quite well in the stock market, and people in the Senate are still doing quite well. And the reason why they beat the market, the reason why they beat the traders, is because they have inside information. And you've had attempts in the past to try and stop the trading in Congress. You have some lawmakers in Congress that want to pass legislation to make it illegal for members to trade individual stocks. Currently, you have Democratic Senators Mark Kelly of Arizona and John Ossoff of Georgia, who wrote a bill proposal. It's the Ban Congressional Stock Trading Act. The bill would require lawmakers and their families to place stock portfolios into a blind trust while they're in office. Makes sense. That's what the president is supposed to do. Granted, our previous president, Donald Trump, infamously did not do that, but all the other presidents do follow it. They're supposed to put their holdings into a blind trust so that they don't unethically operate in office to help themselves. Trump, notoriously very unethical, and so he had no problem trying to use his position, his office, to make money. You have Democratic Representatives Angie Craig of Minnesota, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who have proposed banning lawmakers from owning stocks outright, which I wouldn't have a problem with. They get paid rather well to be in Congress, and then they make all kinds of money from their illegal bribe or their legalized bribes that they take. In 2012, you have the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. It was called the Stock Act, S-T-O-C-K. Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. That bill was passed by Obama. The picture here to my left, that's Obama signing the Stock Act. Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. The bill was weak, and mostly what it did was it put requirements on members of Congress to report individual stock trades that they or their immediate family do. You have members of Congress who infamously don't trade stocks themselves, but their husband does. For instance, Nancy Pelosi. She and her husband trade a lot of stocks. They're very wealthy, and they've made a ton of money since Nancy Pelosi's been in the House of Representatives, because she's been there for decades. And it was to try and prevent members of Congress from trading stocks on their private information. The problem is with the Stock Act bill was it was an attempt to try and shame them, to say you have to publicly admit you've done this. The reporting period was 45 days. Once you made a trade, your spouse, significant other made a trade, within 45 days you had to report it. Otherwise, you were violating the law. Members of Congress violate this law every year. Every year, there are members of Congress who violate the Stock Act. Notably, in 2020, Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, violated the Stock Act. He made a stock trade and didn't report it till 2021, I believe. It was around a year he waited to report. Was he worried? Of course not. To this day, no one has ever been prosecuted for violating the Stock Act. So why would these folks be worried about it? They don't get prosecuted for doing the illegal thing. And so you have Democrats who dodge questions about it. They try and duck out and avoid when reporters ask them about the whole stock trading thing, because they know what's going on. Nancy Pelosi's been asked about it, and she tries to just avoid those questions. She'll make her goofy comments that, oh, we have a capitalist economy, we have a free market economy. What's wrong if my husband gets phenomenally wealthy off the information I have as the leader of the House? But if you vote Democrat, it should bug you that Nancy Pelosi plays these games with that, because you do have some Republicans who've used the Democrat leadership's silence on these questions about trading on inside information, inside knowledge, play some rhetorical games. I mean, what the Republicans say in regard to this is that they agree that people shouldn't violate the Stock Act. Members of Congress should not be trading stocks on inside information. What they're saying is true. They don't believe it. And as you saw in that poll earlier, they've groomed their voters, a portion of them, to believe that it's okay for these members of Congress to cheat, to make money, to cheat the system. And it's empty rhetoric. It's empty rhetoric that the Republicans are using. They don't believe it. They don't buy it. They still heavily participate in the stock trading themselves. But Democrats have dropped the ball on addressing it and left a vacancy there for Republicans, even though it's empty rhetoric. Even though what they're saying is BS, they've left a vacancy for Republicans to stand up and talk a big game and make it look like they're holding the moral position, when in actuality they're not, and they would never do anything. They're not creating any legislation. You actually have Democrats who are composing legislation. It's not going to pass. There are too many, as I said, almost $300 million last year traded between members in the House and the Senate. There are too many people making way too much money to be willing to vote this benefit they see for themselves out. And Republicans certainly aren't going to vote for it. Republicans aren't even crafting legislation for it. And that's why I can easily say that it's obviously empty rhetoric when it comes from Republicans, because all they're doing is talking about it. You have some more left-leaning, more progressive Democrats who are actually trying to put legislation together to prevent the stock trades. But no matter what you do, in order to stop it, you've got to have punishment that's followed through with. I mean, the Stock Act got passed. It was gutted somewhat in 2013. It was 2013 when they partially gutted the Stock Act. But either way, nobody has ever been prosecuted for violating the Stock Act. You have hundreds of members of Congress since 2012, when it was passed, who have violated the Stock Act, who have made individual trades, not reported it within the 45 days, no penalty, nothing. So why would they care if there's no penalty, no punishment for it? You have John Fetterman, who's the Democratic candidate running for Senate in Pennsylvania. He's the one running against Dr. Oz. And John Fetterman is polling really rather well right now in Pennsylvania. He's running a very good campaign against Dr. Oz. But Fetterman's the former lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. And he also has weighed in on the members of Congress trading stocks. And he said lawmakers should not be making profits off the same companies they're supposed to be regulating based on closed-door information that isn't available to the public. I mean, pretty simple. Hard to disagree with him. I don't care how you lean politically. I don't see how you disagree with that. People who go into Congress as lawmakers should not be making profits off of the companies they are supposed to be regulating and overseeing and making sure those companies don't cheat us. And lawmakers are trading on information they have that nobody else does. You have Lucas Kuntz, a progressive Democrat, running for the Senate in Missouri. He wants to see more from the bills. He wants jail time for violators. Kuntz said, if you want to get rich, go do something else. Be a stock trader if you want to trade stocks. Which, again, I don't see how you can really disagree with that perspective. But this is a huge problem. The reason why I'm doing this episode is because recently you had the news come out that Nancy Pelosi's husband just bought over $1 million of this chip stock right before a $52 billion subsidy vote. And this is from MoneyWise. This headline is from MoneyWise, and they're asking the question, is there time to tag along? Because you do have people who follow the Pelosis. Paul and Nancy Pelosi are infamous for doing particularly well in the stock market. And you've got TikTokers, you've got Twitter people who, once they get disclosures, they put it out. This is what the Pelosis are investing in. The problem with average people trying to tag along with the Pelosis is Paul Pelosi purchased this stock, and it says over $1 million. The disclosure shows that it's between $1 million and $5 million that the Pelosi's invested. And this is the actual disclosure from Nancy Pelosi. She's the one that's in Congress. She's the one that has to make this disclosure, and she followed the Stock Act. She followed the law. She made it within 45 days. And the thing is, like most members of Congress, she'll wait till the very end, and she'll submit this disclosure on day 44 or day 45. It was last month when her husband bought this stock, because they were discussing in Congress, and in one of my videos, you have the video I discussed Joe Biden making the deal with Mitch McConnell to put a anti-abortion right-wing religious ideologue in a lifetime appointment to a judgeship in Kentucky, even though there's no judgeship available right now in Kentucky. Basically, that guy's waiting. He's been nominated. He's going to be approved because Democrats in the Senate aren't going to shun Joe Biden like they should and not approve it. But Joe Biden was putting this guy on the bench. You had a lot of people asking the question, why is Joe Biden, at a time when there's so many people, particularly Democrats, people who voted for Joe Biden, why is he thumbing his nose, putting his thumb in their face of his own voters, of his own supporters, by putting an anti-abortion judge on the bench in Kentucky to appease Mitch McConnell at a time when Roe versus Wade's just been overturned? That news came out. I was taken aback by it that Joe Biden would be that brazenly ignorant or stupid or not caring, feeling like he can do whatever he wants. And the thing is, he can do that. The optics are horrible. I don't see how he expects to get people to vote for him when he's doing stuff like that. But he did that. One of the things people had brought up was there was this $52 billion bill. It's a semiconductor bill that's going through Congress. And one of the guesses was that Mitch McConnell agreed to help that semiconductor bill pass if Joe Biden put this right-wing anti-abortion guy on the bench in Kentucky. Since then, what we've learned is that, according to Mitch McConnell, there was no deal between he and Biden. Biden just said he would put this anti-abortion, right-wing religious ideologue on the bench as a gift to his friend Mitch McConnell. I mean, Joe Biden seems delusional in doing stuff like that, and certainly he seems like a traitor to the voters who put him in office by doing that. And like I was saying in the video I did before, he doesn't have to make a deal with Mitch McConnell to get the semiconductor bill passed. One of the things you can guarantee will pass Congress are bills that are going to dole out billions and tens of billions of dollars to corporations that donate to these two parties. These companies donate to the Republicans, they donate to the Democrats. They donate to both parties. When there's a bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill they made such a big deal about, the reason why it was guaranteed to pass is because it is a massive corporate handout bill. You have plenty of large corporations that are going to get billions of dollars from that bill, tens of billions of dollars. Then you have this semiconductor bill, and it's going to pass. You know, my reaction to people saying that perhaps it was a deal to get this bill passed, I'm like, you don't got to make a deal to get it passed. Mitch McConnell will make sure it passes because he wants his donors to get that money too, because he will get kickbacks from it in the form of campaign contributions. The Republican Party will. The Democrat Party will. That bill will pass. Apparently, this wasn't the judgeship wasn't a deal with McConnell. Apparently, it was just something Joe Biden decided to do because he's so tone deaf. He doesn't seem to get it, how pissed off his voters are at Roe being overturned. And this semiconductor bill, it is in Congress, and last month in June, Nancy Pelosi's husband decided to buy stock in NVIDIA to try and capitalize on, I'm sure, his knowledge from his wife that this bill will pass. This is going to pass. It's giving our donors money, so nobody's going to stop it. And the Pelosi's are going to become even wealthier from this. And like I said, you've got people on Twitter, people on TikTok who follow the Pelosi's, who follow their trades. And you can look for them if you want and try and follow along. The problem is there's a delay between when the Pelosi's make these trades and when it becomes public knowledge. And the gains may have already been gained by that time. But you had that $52 billion subsidy bill that's going to go to companies. I mean, NVIDIA, in the first quarter of this year, they made around $3 billion. They did around $3 billion in revenue in the first quarter. I mean, we're giving tens of billions of dollars in subsidies to companies that are phenomenally wealthy, that make immense amounts of money on their own. And then on top of the money they make, we have lawmakers who are passing bills to give them tens of billions more dollars. And that should anger everybody. I don't care who you vote for, what party you support, don't support. This is the kind of thing that should piss you off, that they make so much money, these companies, and then our politicians are going to give them more money. That's the reason for this video. That news came out this week that, of course, Paul and Nancy Pelosi have millions of dollars invested in a company that's going to make money from this legislation. That's how these people in Congress make so much money. That's how they beat the market so consistently, is because they have knowledge of what's going to pass Congress, what sectors, and oftentimes what individual companies are going to benefit from it, where their stocks will go up, so they invest their money into those companies. They make money. And that's one of the ways people in Congress make money, is by trading stocks. And it should be illegal. And for these people who are the Democrats who are trying to pass legislation, I agree with the legislation. The thing is, you've got to have policing within it. It's got to have teeth. It's got to have an effect. If lawmakers start going to prison for trading stocks, let's face it, Martha Stewart, who is a wealthy, famous celebrity, she went to prison for the things that people in Congress are doing. She was trading on insider information. That got Martha Stewart a prison sentence. People in Congress do the same thing. They don't go to prison for it. They violate the Stock Act. There's no penalties. Nobody has ever been prosecuted. Nobody's ever been penalized for violating the Stock Act. The Stock Act cannot exist. That's one of those laws that they can just erase. If you're not going to prosecute anybody for violating it, why is the law there to begin with? The law is there for optics. The law is there so Obama and Biden and Democratic leadership can say, look, we're stopping people in Congress from trading stocks unethically. They stopped nothing. They stopped nothing. And we're left, as you saw, the average people, when we try to participate in the stock market, it doesn't go our way. We're negative overall. I'm sure there are some people who have success in the stock market, who have invested in stocks, and it's done decently well. Overall, we don't do that well, average people, because we don't have the inside information. We don't have the training of going and majoring in finance. And neither do people in Congress. Most of the people in Congress are lawyers. That was their degree in college. Except for somebody like Lauren Boebert, who apparently just doesn't even have a high school education. A high school dropout. That's how bad Republicans are right now. They'll put a high school dropout in Congress and get nothing from her, because that's what you're going to get from a high school dropout who goes to Congress. I agree with the bills. You start putting people in the House of Representatives, people in the Senate in prison for illegal stock trades, and then they'll start considering not doing it once they see people they work with who are doing the same thing go to prison. I agree with people in Congress, just like the president. They should be putting any kind of investments they have into a blind trust. If they own businesses, those businesses should be put in a blind trust. Everything they have that they could end up manipulating their positions to help themselves out, all that stuff should be in a blind trust. Some things should be forced to sell out altogether. You have Joe Manchin, who tries to blow up any kind of legislation that would clamp down on the fossil fuel industry and boost renewable energy, because Joe Manchin is a multi-millionaire from a coal company in West Virginia. He doesn't want fossil fuels to get stamped out. He doesn't want renewable energy to become the predominant energy in the country, because he doesn't make money from renewable energy. He makes money from coal. And he doesn't just make money from coal, he makes money from dirty coal, horrible coal in West Virginia. And the people in West Virginia are worse off for the corruption of Joe Manchin. But that's Joe Manchin. in a business like that, he should not be allowed to own it and be in the Senate, because he can directly affect legislation and say, no, this legislation would hurt my personal coal company. It might help the country overall. It might help the world overall to pass this legislation and to put subsidies into renewable energy companies. But it doesn't help me. It hurts me because of the company I own, so I'm going to stop it. Joe Manchin, some of these times that he's blowing up legislation, it's not because of his donors exclusively. I mean, his donors have a party to it. Joe Manchin is one of the biggest recipients of fossil fuel money in Congress. But he also owns a fossil fuel company in West Virginia. So he's doing what's best for his wealthy donors and what's best for him, because Joe Manchin, like I said, is a multi-millionaire from a coal company in West Virginia. And I will do an episode here before too long to talk about that, because that is so corrupt. It should blow your mind how corrupt Joe Manchin is with that. It's asinine that he's not in prison for being as corrupt as he is. But right now, we have a bunch of corrupt politicians, Republicans and Democrats, in the House and the Senate, who should be going to prison. Not because of some obscure right-wing fever dream for Democrats, or a right-wing or left-wing fever dream for Democrats wanting Republicans to get locked up. I mean, Donald Trump could be locked up for crimes he's committed. Democrats, Republicans in Congress, both could be locked up if we just had laws with tooth to them and enforcement mechanisms that would start clamping down on this stock trading. Our lawmakers aren't spending their time trying to figure out how to make this a better country for you and me. They're spending their time figuring out how to get richer. It's unfortunate, but that's the state of play right now in Congress. Thanks for watching the video. Please give me a like. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.